Economy and Labor, to representatives from the Bermuda Bankers Association, members of the media, and people of Bermuda. In a concerted effort to address the acute housing shortage in Bermuda and to further stimulate economic growth within our economic empowerment zones, I'm pleased to announce today the signing of a memorandum of understanding on behalf of the government of Bermuda as a part of what we refer to as the Approved Residential Scheme Kickstart Program. In June 2022, the Approved Residential Scheme was established to increase the stock of available housing units, stimulate growth within the island's 3 economic empowerment zones, to address economic inequality, and to empower entrepreneurs. Features of the Approved Residential Scheme widen the scope of potential investment by removing certain ownership restrictions, as well as providing customs duty and tax incentives. However, despite the hard work and continued progress being made by the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation and other stakeholder groups, the cost of borrowing was identified as a barrier to prospective investors and developers, which consequently impacted the take-up for this program. The Ministry of Finance, when faced with problems, looks to solve them and found ways to address this issue to provide an environment that encourages investment and development that will create more housing units in Bermuda, which will alleviate housing pressure. The government recognizes the challenge posed by the shortage of affordable housing, which impacts families, younger Bermudians, and can impact our economic growth. Therefore, it remains committed to working with stakeholders to help mitigate these challenges through any initiative that assists. We are pleased to announce the launch of the Approved Residential Scheme Kickstart program, which will offer investors and developers a reduction in local borrowing rates for large-scale residential and mixed-use properties that meet the appropriate guidelines. Under this initiative, the government will provide an aggregate $50 million government guarantee to support approved residential scheme opportunities within the economic empowerment zones. In return for the reduced risk, participating banks, which include HSBC Bermuda, Clarion Bank, and the Bermuda Commercial Bank, have committed to offer a preferred interest rate to eligible applicants. The agreed terms within this MOU represent a collaborative effort between the government and the participating banks to achieve our overall objective of increasing affordable housing, further spurring construction activity, which will provide more jobs and further build on our economic development strategy. The key terms of this MOU include the total limit, as I mentioned before, $50 million. If there's any additional exposure, those matters will need to be agreed by the government of Bermuda. The government guarantee shall remain in place until the expiry of 6 years following the completion of the construction period. And important to note, as with the guarantee for the mortgage guarantee program, the government does not have any involvement and/or influence on the bank's credit underwriting or enforcement decisions. Participating banks will determine the discounted interest rates as the size and scope of the potential development projects can vary. There is no agreed set rate. However, each bank has agreed to offer a discounted rate, which will help to materially reduce the cost of development. Before I hand over to Mr. Jeff Scott from the Bermuda Bankers Association, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the participating banks, HSBC, Clarion, and BCB, for their efforts in working with the government in this program, which we believe will support our economic growth as the government remains committed to executing our economic development strategy. I also like to thank the teams within the Ministry of Finance and at the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation for working with the government on this particular initiative. Now I'll hand over to Mr. Scott. Jeff?
Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Scott. I'm the CEO of the Bermuda Bankers Association, and today I'm joined by executives from the 3 banks. I especially would like to just note Neville Grant, who's the chairman of the Bermuda Bankers Association, with us this morning. We're delighted to be here with you, Mr. Premier, and your colleagues, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Economic Development, to announce this important new initiative. In June of last year, the government of Bermuda released its economic development strategy 2023 to 2027, which includes a core strategic initiative to support and enable growth of the economic empowerment zones. Members of the Bermuda Bankers Association understand the importance of this initiative. Creating opportunities that promote economic development and growth for Bermuda as a whole is important to all of the banks. So following an initial approach by the Ministry of Finance, our Bankers Association members engaged in discussions aimed at identifying opportunities to lower the cost of bank financing for commercial real estate projects. One such opportunity is the scheme where the government of Bermuda provides its unconditional guarantee of the bank financing for qualified residential construction projects. This enables the lenders to offer a lower interest rate, and that scheme took shape and is now called the Approved Residential Kickstart Scheme. The program, and specifically the government guarantee, is not intended to replace or enhance the underlying creditworthiness of any development project. It won't make an unbankable project bankable. The purpose of the government guarantee is solely to allow the lender to offer a lower interest rate option to qualifying borrowers and projects. Each loan will be evaluated on its own merits and in accordance with each bank's customary lending process and risk appetite. And each bank will maintain its own documentation and funding costs. This program demonstrates Bermuda's commercial bank's partnership with government to bring down the cost of borrowing while still maintaining competition between the banks. All of this will be to the benefit of our customers. In closing, let me reiterate, Mr. Premier, that the members of the Bermuda Bankers Association are delighted to support this Kickstart initiative. And we look forward to working with the existing and new clients of the banks on their development and investment plans. For those construction projects that qualify, we can now offer preferential interest rates on their loans. And we believe this will indeed bring benefits and growth to Bermuda, to our economy, and to the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bring it back to the podium. Thank you. All right, we're ready to open it up for questions. Okay, John, Jonathan Bell from Goldman Sachs.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. Just following on a bit outside my territory with this. So, say I'm one of these prospective people that wants to do a housing development. Can you run me through how I qualify for it?
Would you like me to start with that?
Sure.
So there are already in the government's approved residential scheme, there are already qualifying qualifications that are required. Individual projects can be brought directly to the banks, and those will then be viewed on a project by project basis. So the key qualifying criteria are that these are intended to be loans to finance new construction, renovations and enhancements to existing buildings, but in all cases for residential home or unit development.
I hear MOU on one side. That definitely means that it's a concrete scheme. This is something that will go ahead.
It's something that has been negotiated and is now completed. Yes, it has been signed and executed.
Yeah.
My other questions are finance related, but not pertaining to this. I just have, I've got four of them. Maybe for you, sir, if that's okay.
What are they in reference to, Jonathan?
One of them is a gaming commission query, and one has to do with the last year's budget. There was something that came up in it that we wanted to check up on.
Happy to answer those afterwards, certainly.
Yeah,
Want to make sure that
Wait,
we
yeah,
focus
yeah,
on the
yeah.
banking
Cool.
side.
Fine, so Jasmine, bring it back to the podium. Jasmine, do you have any questions regarding this particular issue?
Yes, thank you all for your time. Just out of interest, with the Morgan's Point project due to come online, is there any room or scope for this scheme to be applied to other projects that are currently in works?
Well, I'm not sure if it's scope for others. I mean, the MOU is very specific. It's been negotiated for a while, so there's not a view to expand it. The Morgan's Point project, of course, it is a government-owned company that is going to be executing that. And as I said during my budget statement, there is not any expectation that there will be further need of expenditure from government coffers. Taxpayers had to cough up an amount due to the guarantee that was called. So that is a separate project. What we're doing here is, you know, the Minister of Economy and Labor launched the approved residential schemes a few years ago, though there has been interest, one of the impediments in a rising interest rate environment has been the cost of financing. And as I said, we look to solve problems in the Ministry of Finance. And this was an idea that came up by MP Joshay Adams, who said this is something that we can look at. He also serves as chairman of the BEDC. And we said that we'll work with Bermuda Banks Association. We came to the Bermuda Banks Association. They're willing to do so. And we're happy for the partnership. As a note, we meet with the Bermuda Banks Association on a quarterly basis in the Ministry of Finance. So the relationship, though challenging at times, as you know, we have different interests, it remains strong. And this is an example of a collaborative partnership between the government of Bermuda and the Bermuda Bankers Association.
I think it would be amiss if I didn't bring up Fairmount Southampton, which we know has had some financing, I wouldn't say difficulties, but is it something that you would promote to those investors that to help them in sealing the deal?
Well, no, I think that this is something completely different. That has its own matters, a guarantee that has been debated in Parliament, et cetera. So that is particularly different. On this particular aspect, we know that there are persons who are interested in developing residential developments in our economic empowerment zones. It's something that we want to make sure that happens. But the challenge in all matters with, escalating costs are the cost of interest can be significant. And so in this case, if you're talking about a reduction of the interest rate, it makes it more affordable and possibly able to be banked so that it all comes together so the construction can actually start. We know that we need additional housing. The Minister's Economic Development Strategy calls for an increase in 8,000 jobs in the country. We're on our way with 1,000 jobs being added last year, but we need to continue to accelerate. As there are more jobs, there are going to be the need for there to be additional housing, and we want to make sure that we can do everything necessary to provide for that, so that whether that's Bermudians that are returning back home who may not want to live at home can have a new place to live, or other persons who may have the more housing units that there are supplied wherever it is in the high end, medium end, or low end helps the overall housing market, and we want to make sure that we stabilize housing prices.
Is there a cap on the number of residential homes that can be built that the island can sustain in terms of the environment?
I'm not entirely certain if there's a cap. We want to, I think the City of Hamilton plan, which is out for draft right now, speaks about the need to have more developments in the City of Hamilton. If you look at the infrastructure works that are taking place throughout the country, whether we're putting in water lines, sewage lines, putting power lines underground, and those things, it's to make sure that we can have a higher capacity of persons that are living and working in the City of Hamilton. Great.
Jasmine, that concludes your questions. Thank you very much. Premier, did you want to ask any further questions?
No, go ahead.
That's okay, yeah, please.
You said you had 4 additional questions?
I've got 4 questions here. I need reading glasses.
Bring my minister for support, see.
Right, this is to do with casino, the Gaming Commission. Can you tell us a bit about why the Gaming Commission's overdraft with Butterfield went from 1.2 million in January 2019 to 9.8 million in December of 2012? 2022.
So here's the thing. I think that the Gaming Commission has been debated significantly in the Houses of Parliament, whether it's me, who was Minister of Finance, the former Minister of Finance who had responsibility for the Casino Gaming Commission. And I would encourage the Royal Gazette to look through the various debating points and items which were laid out in the Hansards over those years for those particular points. And for the opposition who are asking the questions, they can also refer to the Hansard.
Okay, moving on. So the government paid off the Gaming Commission last June. Why didn't you announce that when it happened?
It was announced and declared inside of the budget statement, and it was announced in Parliament. We do these things, that is the way that things are declared, and it is not hidden, so it is clear for all to see.
Last one on that. We figured that the Commission had taken 16 million in combined grants, loans, and guarantees since it got launched. How do you assess that in terms of value?
I think the only outcome will be the issue insofar as banking of casino proceeds. It's something that we have discussed with the persons that are behind me. There are various risk appetites that exist. We can't pretend that we exist in a vacuum here in Bermuda. Now, despite all of the noise and all the different things which people want to make, there's one point to which I will state, because your newspaper particularly was promulgating the falsehoods that were stated around on this particular matter. And as I said in Parliament, when we asked the corresponding banks directly whether or not there was an issue of the Minister of Finance being responsible for gaming, their response was, we do not have that as an issue. We believe that as a benefit. We are working through the challenges. It is not easy in an international financial center when dealing with these particular issues. So we'll continue to work with the Bermuda Bankers Association. We'll continue to work with our partners to try to advance this. But as I said in Parliament, the Gaming Commission operations have been significantly streamlined to make sure to account for the lower volume of work until there is a space where this casino that is operating. Anything about housing approved residential schemes?
No, sorry, there's just one last one for me. It's to do with the 2024 budget. It contained that we would have a Q3 announcement on the Clinic for Medical Tourism, a world-class clinic. Can you tell us where we are with that?
I will happily follow up with the ministers leading that. I don't have anything off the top of my head. I know that work continues to proceed. But here's the most important point, Jonathan. It is not something that is going to be funded by the government. And I know that everyone wants the government to answer for what the private sector is doing, but the private sector is the ones, we don't want everything funded by the government. Government cannot be the answer in all things to all people. And if we're going to move and advance in a place where we're friendly for investors, supported by our banking community, we need to make sure that that's something that is done in the private sector, not the public sector. We have our own hospital and our own things, and these are things for the private sector. So the minister's leading, I'm happy to have a follow-up, but it's important to know that it's a private sector initiative that the government is doing its best to support. Jasmine?
One question regarding CARICOM, if that's okay.
One second, Jasmine. Mr. Lindsay actually has a question related to this particular initiative. So, Mr. Lindsay, please field your question.
The benefit from this initiative and what criteria would one have to put in place?
Well, I can't necessarily speak to the criteria, but I think what the head of the Bermuda Bankers Association said, that it has to be a bankable project. There are developments that are looking to happen in the economic empowerment zones. The approved residential scheme allows there to be construction. The Northeast Hamilton, City of Hamilton plan has removed height restrictions. There is the ability to do so. But of course, this is something that is new for Bermuda. And so we want to make sure that for the developers that are looking at that we make it as attractive as possible to do so. So developers, persons, you know some people who are looking at doing things in North Hamilton, yourself. And so from that aspect, it is access to a lower interest rate. I think that is the particular benefit. We want to make sure that we do everything that we can to allow for the private sector to operate, to make sure that we can provide additional things. The government cannot do it all. As I said at the budget breakfast, the private sector has a role to play as well.
All right, we're mindful of time. Jasmine, your last question, I believe, has to do with
So you mentioned that Bermuda is not seeking freedom of movement caveat if we do go for full CARICOM membership, which faced some pushback online. What do you think of that discussion in terms of our ability not to participate in that aspect?
Well, I can't necessarily speak to feedback online. I deal with the feedback that I get from the leaders of CARICOM, who completely understand Bermuda's position. It's not unusual, as the Deputy Premier said. There are many full members of CARICOM that do not participate in freedom of movement. So that is how we are going to approach the situation. We have to look at things in our unique circumstances, and I believe that's the approach. And so we're going to be moving forward to consultation. Now that we have a letter of entrustment, we'll be able to get the information from CARICOM and discuss those things. But the government is focused on what the leaders of CARICOM are saying, recognizing that Bermuda is not unique in this particular circumstance. And for those persons who may want to comment on social media, they can go ahead. The government is focused on our interactions with the leaders of the CARICOM community.
Are the ways to amend possibly work permit restrictions to workers?
Those are all things that will be handled in the future. I think we're being very premature. I know that everyone wants to be excited about this. What the government has stated is that we are going to engage in a full consultation. And as much questions as people want to ask and different things like that, I will say, wait for that time, and then we can have those conversations and discussions.
Excellent. Thank you. That concludes today's press briefing. Thank you, members of the meeting, for joining us. Thank you, members of the public, for tuning in.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.